And welcome to A Game of Draws. My name's Sarah, and in today's episode I'm going to talk to you about a little game that I used to play when I was learning how to draw. So the idea is simple. You get a deck of cards, preferably Pokemon cards. You want something with very animal-like creatures on it. You make sure that there's only monster or Pokemon type cards in the deck, and then you shuffle it. The first card that you pick up off the top of the deck, you try to draw as closely to the original artwork on the card. You don't have to try and get it as detailed as you want. This is kind of where you can decide how much pressure you want to put on yourself. So if you're just starting out, I'd recommend just loosely trying to copy it. Think about the different shapes, what it's made up of. So I'm looking at this layer on, and it's got this overall arch shape. It's got a triangle on its head. It's got lots of little parts clipped onto it. Piece that together until you end up with what you want. And you want to be thinking about how it looks in 3D. The most important thing about this is you don't use any other references. Don't go to the internet and look up this Pokemon. I want you to just use the artwork that's in front of you, because that's really going to make you think about how it looks in 3D and forcing yourself to figure that out for yourself. Once you've done that to the point where you feel like you can do that pretty well, now I want you to pick up the next card and try and draw the Pokemon in a different pose. So if you're looking here, I'm drawing this Trico, and in the original image, he's kind of pressed up in sort of a spy style against a tree. What I'm doing instead is taking Trico, seating him on the floor, and making him face away from us. This really makes me think about the different components of his body, the way he arranges himself, where the weight sits on him, and how I want him to look. If you really want to push this effect further, what you can do is use lighting with just 1 or 2 markers or a pencil shade, and just adding in that little lighting effect to really accentuate the change that you've made. Do this as many times as you can, really, because it's going to teach you a lot about learning to draw without reference, because you're going to think about, well, once you know what something looks in one direction, your brain can now figure out what it looks like in other directions. What I want you to remember as well is don't get upset with yourself if you make mistakes. You are allowed to make mistakes when you're learning how to draw. Don't feel bad about that. If you look here, I accidentally coloured in C.'s eyes wrong. Now, I decided instead to try and think around that, and I want you to think about that. Try and turn your mistakes into good things. At the end of the day, if you get the colours wrong or the shading wrong, just pretend that it's a shiny Pokemon. After you've kind of perfected this, I want you to start thinking about what your characters are made of. So, if you look at a lot of the artwork, some of them are drawn in different styles and also in physical different mediums. I remember a lot of them looked like they were made of plasticine. So with this one, I've decided to think about how it would look if it was a plush. So if it was quite heavy and it sat with soft coating, how would it look? And really think about how that affects every single piece of it. Like, I've tried to add in the sewing, I've added in little dots for texture. If you wanted to make it made of wood, you need to think about wood grain and how that reflects light. Is it polished or is it raw? Really think about these different textures and how they affect the way your character is built up. Now, you can really push this technique, and if you look here, I'm drawing this Sableye, but I'm trying to make it really symbolic of the Sableye. I don't want it to look just like the Sableye, and the reason why I'm doing that is because I have completely changed the makeup of its body by turning it into a little flicker of flame. So imagine you wanted to make something out of water. How different would that look from something made out of ice? Really think about how it's physically made up, how weight affects on it, how it moves, and try and recreate that with each drawing that you do. And by combining all of these different techniques, from copying little sections that you want to keep in, to changing the layout, to changing the orientation, and even changing the makeup, the physical anatomical makeup, I guess, of the image, You can really teach yourself so much about learning to draw without reference and learning to be way more creative with your own designs, because you'll start thinking, you won't think that everything has to be in a certain way. You won't think, if I have to make a Pokemon, it has to be a little animal. It could be made out of fire, it could be made out of water, and I want you to think like that. Now, if you want to make this more of a challenge, get something like YuGiOh cards. They've got a lot more detail in them, and the cards are much more artistically stylized. So here I've got up Charcoal in Patchy, and in the image you can see that he's kind of slumped over, sitting away from us slightly, and he's got this smoke billowing around him. I decided to try and imagine what those different components of his body look like. I mean, they're very simple components, but it's the detail and the wood grain that gives him his personal style. And moving that so that rather than him looking so dejected, now he's got a bit more passion. He's getting up, ready to fight. I tried to really accentuate this by using long strokes, splaying out the wood some more, giving him a bit of personality. And once you've gotten used to trying this all out, you should be able to do that yourself as well. As you can see, I'm focusing a lot on the wood grain. I want to think about how edges of the wood look at different angles, how using little dots and little dashes changes the different effects. For example, do look at real wood and real ice and real water to get these ideas. For example, you might look at a piece of wood and see that on one edge there's a lot of dotty grains, and yet on the other edge there's straight lines. So I hope this helped, and I look forward to seeing you next week. If you do this at home, please send me pictures, I would love to see them. And we had the first episode of the Artist Lounge podcast, so go and have a look at that because it was great fun. See you next week!